Hospital Porter's pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to HPANWO Radio.
Well, the American government have held back a lot of, when people have got ideas and they put them in, and American government stops people going forward. I mean, there was a car, I think that was in Australia, that someone did a car that ran on water.
Yes, Mayer, Stanley Mayer.
Yeah, and, those kind of things, they don't want that to go forward, because it's you think you're doing something for the best interest of the world, and you find out that there's people out there who don't want that happening because they want to control. And if you've got people using petrol and fossil fuels, you've got them under control.
Precisely, yeah. You can control the flow of energy, so you control it for political reasons. That's a very important political tool if you're the kind of person who wants to do that. The Mayer cell is actually, I think, seems to be based on some kind of anomalous heat effect, which was first observed in 1926. Later on, it came up in the 80s, and it was called cold fusion, and it almost went public, and there was a massive panic to keep it suppressed.
Yeah. I think that was perhaps some kind of orgone technology, because a research friend of mine met someone who was had a working type of engine of that type, and it would only work with steel engines. The aluminium it wasn't compatible with, and that would sort of seem to indicate it was some type of orgone effect. And I think whether the weather interacted with it, or people's energy charge interacted with it, because Australia is a very dry environment that's good for getting high orgone charges. The other thing with ether is that why it's suppressed is the spiritual and psychic aspects, because if you've got an energy that connects everything underneath particles, and that means we're all connected, and that means there's it's likely that there's other dimensions, that telepathy is real, and that also the spiritual aspect. If we're all one energy,
I believe all consciousness is one. I believe, and that's what you're tapping into, and that's why you can communicate with these beings in the sky, because ultimately we have that connection.
Sure. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. And it indicates there is like a higher being, because if we're all one energy, and that energy has got consciousness, then it's bound to be the physical substrate of what we call the higher being, or great spirit.
God or something, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's interesting that this would explain so much. I mean, it would be as an explanatory model. It could cover things such as we mentioned earlier, thoughts, psychic phenomena, very, very powerful intuitive urges. My own experience with watching the Kate Bush video, your guys' experiences with your Leon reading the book, and Nick with the various experiences you've had. It would explain things like people who have past life memories. It would explain people who, if someone dies that they're very fond of, they find themselves in communication with that person, or a medium or a medium can communicate with them. Because the person who died is essentially still existing in another form.
Well, the conscious being is
with a memory, with the memory of the life they've just had, and an ability to see into our world, and a desire to communicate with the people I left behind. Yeah, which is what I would do. I speculate that's what I would do in that situation.
Well, this is what happened with my mum. When my mum died, my sister and myself were in her front room, and then an Iranian friend of mine that I knew from the Midlands came in. And as he came through the door, he suddenly got a text on his phone, and he didn't go to the inbox, but it appeared on the front of the phone, on the screen, and it said, "No need to worry. When you die, you're not really dead."
I've heard so many stories like this. I mean, the use of electronics by spirits is amazing. I mean, Don Phillips, another guest of mine, Don Phillips, has gone into this in enormous detail, and it would explain. It would explain. I mean, going back to another colleague of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, he also had his own. He started off as Freud's right-hand man, but then broke away from the Freud network and had his own ideas, because he talked about the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
And about how this went on to people like Lyle Watson went on to study the monkeys in Japan that found that they could once enough of them got a certain idea, just 1% of them, he reckoned, same idea will transmit automatically to the rest of the population through some means which is extrasensory. They weren't just watching each other and learning from each other. Suddenly all the monkeys seem to know how to do it.
It's the same with the dogs, though. It's the same with dogs. When you get wild dogs, or wolves, they go and attack, and they seem to be one telepathically together. They assume their roles without, physically being seen to say anything.
Yeah, you see that with ants as well, and birds. The way they fly in a flock as one organism in the sky.
Yeah.
They actually, funny enough, those big flocks of birds resemble some of the creatures that Nick has photographed. They look like flatfish almost, some sheet of material that's waving through the sky. Yeah,
there's a lot of them. Yeah,
it would explain things like the dogs you mentioned. Dogs seem to have a natural tendency for this, maybe more than most humans do. There's dogs that seem to have an intuitive sense of what their owner is doing when they're not around. For example, they know that they react before the owner comes home, as if they go and sit by the doors if they're waiting for the owner to come in to greet them. And there's no way they could know, because the owner's like is 20 miles away in a car driving towards them. Experiments have been done by Rupert Sheldrake. I mean, he did some experiments on this. He did them properly. He didn't tell the other people in the house when the owner was coming home. So, because dogs watch us and they listen to us, and they can pick up, they understand a certain amount of human language, even though they can't speak.
Yeah.
No, the people in the house didn't know. So nobody knew at all except the experimental conductor. There was like a double-blind situation. And the dogs reacted, you see. And it's almost as if the dog did have some connection to the owner through the collective unconscious.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I've been walking down the road with my two dogs, sadly not with me anymore, but I've walked down a really dark road, and all of a sudden the dogs will just stop, and I'll get this feeling in my stomach of dread, and then the Geiger counter will go off. And it all happened at exactly the same time. So, we're definitely tuned into something between us. But the dogs do know, yeah. I mean, they seem to understand. I mean, when my dog died, my last dog, my dog Elfie, he walked into the front room and he just stared at Lucy, and they seemed to just stare at each other for a few minutes. And then they both lay down in tandem, and then Elfie coughed and died. It was almost like, it communicated the fact that he was just about to die.
That's kind of what Dr. Peter Fenwick calls near-death lucidity, which he's observed in humans many, many times. It's exactly the same thing you get in humans. Yeah, this could be the key to unlocking this whole area of research. It really could.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It could explain why Wilhelm Reich himself actually spent the last year of his life in jail. So yeah, I mean, he was. I know he was a maverick, and he didn't have much respect for courts and things like that. But he ended up being shoved in. He got 2 years in jail actually, but weird when he was in jail. Firstly, the officials actually destroyed massive amounts of his papers. A lot of his books, a lot of his papers was burned by the order of the court. And he was a few days before he was due for release. And then he died in his cell.
Yeah, they killed him. Yeah,
in the same way Jeffrey Epstein did. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was really neglected in prison. I mean, his daughter published all the information she could get on what condition he was in when he died. But he was in a terrible state in the prison. They'd really neglected him. And they'd given him an aspirin, which maybe wasn't an aspirin, but maybe it was. But he could have died of neglect anyway, because I mean, they were gunning for him. He was put in prison.
Same as Tesla.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't actually do anything wrong. He tried to interact with the court system. I mean, he took a bit of an unusual way of interacting with them, but it was one of his student doctors or transported some material in a way that the FDA had banned. He took an orgone accumulator across state lines, and that was all it was. And they said, well, you've gone against our injunction. You've got to come into court and write saying, well, this court can't have jurisdiction on scientific matters. And then they said, they said, well, you can get off if you plead this or that. But he just stuck to his guns, and he got given a completely totally inappropriate length of sentence for something he didn't even do.
It's the usual story. I mean, they find excuses to lock you up, which it doesn't reveal their underlying motive. They just find excuses to do. I mean, this is what they did with Tesla. I mean, again with Tesla, we have this destruction of his work. I mean, his papers. But even before the undertakers were allowed to collect his body, he died in a hotel in 1941, and. Or was it 43? I can't remember. It was a long time. It was sometime before before Reich. But again, you see the same pattern. There's a massive cover-up of all the things he was doing. A lot of his papers were confiscated.
But they went on to, I believe the US government went on to do work on some of the projects that he was creating,
Well, they weaponize it in secret. They do.
Oh yeah.
They weaponize it in secret.
It's all about death and destruction, isn't it? A lot of these people do things that they want to help humanity, and it's always turned around. We can make a weapon out of this.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot of the energy generations and things like that, and it's all used in that way. Now, I want to come on to. You've been challenged by several people, including who've disagreed with you. One of them I'm disappointed to see is Andrew Collins, because I think he's quite cool. But he disagreed with you, and a couple of other people did. James DeMeo, I know,
wasn't so much with me. No, what it was is ages ago when I first met Leon brought my attention to something that had been written by James DeMeo, which was a paper. Well, it's like an article called "Negative Finding on Constable's Bioforms." And he was trying to claim that the Constable's bioforms were, air bells or halations or something to do with, mechanical artifacts. And what happened was the book came out by Andrew Collins, and Andrew Collins claimed to have repeated cloudbuster operations, and he had a couple of photographs, right? And in one of the photographs, he claimed these were stereo photographs. And in one of the photographs, on the right-hand side one, it was meant to be two frame, wasn't it? The left and right of the frame. I think what was it called, Leon? The type of photography he was doing again? It was
a stereoscopic.
Oh yeah, stereoscopic. So he claimed that the two photographs were basically the two parts of the stereoscopic image. And on one side, it showed some trees and it showed some that looked like bioforms. And on the next bit, it didn't show any. So he concluded that basically these things, because they didn't appear on both sides, basically they weren't real. But I basically got hold of the picture and I put it next to the other one and I superimposed it over the top. And it's not the same photograph. It's taken from a totally different angle. And I noticed that I went through all the photographs, the ones that he claimed, and he put very little information on it as well, Andrew Collins. But he seemed to just go along with this thing that, they're not real. Which kind of surprised me because he's written a few books and he's talked about a lot of things. But I proved by overlaying these things that they were taken by not a stereoscopic camera, but by two separate cameras at different angles. And because no times were given, you couldn't even tell that they were taken at the same time. So I thought, well, this is not good. It's on the internet, and basically I need to come forward and get this proof. So I said to Leon, we should get together and, his one was called Negative Finding on Constable's Bioforms. So let's do a positive finding on one and bring together all the evidence from Trevor James Constable, from the Luciano, Boconne and the GRCU and mine. And let's just present this so that people know. And that's where the idea of the paper come from. But it came a really big paper, two-part one. I mean, 17,000 words, I think, or something.
You've got a diagram here explaining exactly what's wrong with the photograph. Yeah. The so-called control photograph. You've got a diagram.
Well, I didn't want to actually use the proper ones in case I ended up getting sued for taking pictures.
I hope Andrew wouldn't be that petty.
Yeah, we had to split it into two papers. I think one paper was mainly about the evidence from the 1950s
Yeah,
through to
57.
57 through to when Nik started working, and then the second paper was about Nik's evidence, and also one just a couple of pages of that. It was mainly about Nik's evidence, but a couple of pages looked at whether this evidence against the bioforms was substantial or not, and we pretty much showed that it wasn't. It's not a stereoscopic picture.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I see. It's that's good. It's good you sort of got that out of the way and you provided a rebuttal. Now we are going to run out of time soon. But I do want to get onto another subject. It's one that you did bring up in your papers, and I think it may be relevant. It's to do with bions. Now that's BION. Because this is something that predates your kind of work. It's something that Freud Reich did himself.
Yeah. Well, maybe just briefly jumping back, I should say
Sure.
it didn't appear to us to be a stereoscopic picture, but perhaps Andrew Collins believes it was, but it didn't look like it. It was a solid.
It wasn't. It was taken at a different angle, totally different angle. I traced them and put them on top. I got them dead the same, and it's taken from a different angle. We pointed out everything that was about 10 things that were wrong with it, and not just that photograph, but other ones. So that didn't count as evidence, as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, I agree. So sorry, Ben. You were just going saying about bions.
Yeah. I think it may be related. Yeah, bions that Reich himself discovered.
Yeah, they were the key thing, because Reich went from the libido of Freud. That Freud originally, for about 10 years, thought libido was a real energy. So that sparked Reich off. And then he found that there was a bioelectricity when people are excited or outgoing or ingoing. He found the bioelectricity. And then he thought, it's not electrical, that this energy is too biological just to be electrical, and the electrical component is too small to explain how organisms work. So that's why he started looking at microorganisms, and then he accidentally cooked sand in one of the experiments, and there was a glow coming off the sand, and this was because if you subject matter to, especially like matter with a high life force like sand, because it's been in the sun so much, if you subject it to a high amount of heat and in water, then you get these tiny little bions appearing, and they're the smallest biological creatures. They're smaller than cells, smaller than bacteria, and they're perhaps about the size of a clump of viruses, or a very large virus, or say half a dozen medium-sized viruses, so which you can actually see with very high-powered microscopy, and these bions, when he cooked the sand, he found that he got conjunctivitis in the eye that was watching the samples on the microscope, and that's when he realized there was an energy coming off this cooked sand, and trying to contain this energy led him to the Orgone accumulators and various things. But bions are a key thing.
Yeah, it's almost like this was a form of life that appeared spontaneously.
Yeah, and that's another huge area. Like the spontaneity in biology is the ether of physics. So we've been taught every cell's got to come from a cell. No bacteria can break down into viruses. Amoebas can't become bacteria. A cell is just a cell. Well, none of that's true, and part part of all that is because we're only allowed to look at tiny things with electron microscopes. Like this ties into COVID a little bit, because you can't understand anything about viruses unless you look at them alive in the body. There's no point. If you kill stuff, you're just looking at dead stuff. You don't know what it's doing in the body. Yeah. So that's what Reich did. He was trying to find what powered organisms, and he boiled up orgonotic organic matter, and he also looked at cells disintegrating in plants and saw that there was little budding tiny things that budded off when things disintegrated.
I can't help
wondering. Food, didn't he? Didn't he find? Wasn't he looking at food as well? Food stuff and things.
Yeah, that's quite an obscure thing in even within orgonomy, but it was food that he looked at first, and then I think it was after that he looked at sand and discovered that inanimate matter can break down into organisms. But yeah, it's literally God's kitchen, isn't it? Like, if you can, anyone can make life in their own kitchen. Like it's
really funny because like I can't help wondering, and I've actually thought this when I was first talking to Nick a few years ago, whether the bions are actually a condensation of the creatures that Nick's talking about, or the kind, or something similar, maybe something smaller. It's a kind of condensation, because there's other. I mean, as far as generating life, I mean, the people just go to the spontaneous generation of life. People always go back to the Miller-Urey experiment, which I talked about in my SETI and UFOs talk, where they tried to to see if they could make life from recreating the early environment of the Earth in a test tube. And they were, well, the experiment was actually stopped before they really achieved what I thought was the right, because they were actually generating complex chemicals and things like that when they didn't know where they came from. Yeah, but a far more interesting experiment, and this is something that Brian Desborough used to write about, a guy, I think he's dead now. He used to write online various articles. This is far more interesting. Actually, you have to go right back to the early 19th century for this. But there was a guy from Somerset called Andrew Cross. I don't know if you've heard of him. He did experiments with electrolysis and electrocrystallization, and using various materials, using various minerals in water. And he found that you've heard of him. He created. The newspapers reported that he created insects out of nothing, because these insects started appearing in this test tube, this supposedly sealed test tube, and he actually. He worked them out that they were mites, a type of mite called an Acarus, which is a genus of mites. They're very, very small little things. And the newspaper said that these things had actually appeared. Cross then later recanted, because he was getting nasty letters from people from the vicar and things like this. But is it possible that these creatures that he identified could be a form of a condensation of life from these plasmatic forms into solid?
Well, they're plasmoidal and they're amoeba-like, especially some of the ones that Trevor James Constable photographed. They're huge amoeba-like bioforms, and I've photographed a few similar ones, which are on the paper, huge blue ones, and a daytime one that looks pretty much like Trevor James Constable's, and it's got vacuoles and lots of things that you'd see on amoeba-type objects, you know.
Yeah, it's these separate things that people keep.
It's just size, isn't it? It's just it's just size, but you know, it's endless. Space, everything. So it's very hard to determine what size is, because we're such a minuscule thing compared to the universe. I mean, even the world is, isn't it? You know, it's just like an atom spinning through. You know,
it's that small, compared to the universe.
Maybe it is an atom. It's got things going around. You know, we've got like the sun in the middle and all the planets going around. It looks very like some of the diagrams I've seen of atoms. But
it's interesting.
Yeah. I think bions and the plasma, the bioforms might be like, you know how the beginning of something can be quite like the end of something, like, because like a bion is the simplest material life form you can get. I mean, it's got I'm not sure if it's been checked for DNA, but it doesn't have a nucleus. It's literally just a membrane in plasma, and and it moves around. I mean, some people, even within orgonomy, are not 100% sure that they're alive, a bit like viruses. Like, we wouldn't know if a virus is alive unless we actually watch it in the body, moving around, pulsing, eating stuff, but with a bion, I'm pretty sure they're alive because they pulse, they move, that you can gram stain them, but they're pretty much of a class of. I mean, mainstream biology has fallen on them a little bit. They've found microspheres, they've called them, or cell wall deficient forms, or proteinoids. And I think one bunch of Japanese microbiologists even accidentally called them bions, and for biological entities. And then me and a couple of other people pointed this out to them, and I think they were quite embarrassed that they'd given it the same name as Reich, because they hadn't even heard of Reich. But I think the bioforms are right at the maybe at the other end of things, because a bioform is, when it comes into this reality, they can be a fair size. I mean, some of them are up to like half a bus in size, and they're intelligent. They're telepathic. They've got, some of them have got intelligence equal to or above our own, whereas the bions definitely seem to, well, not definitely, but my observation of them is that they're in the microbiology. They're similar to other microbiological forms. So I'm sure they have a group consciousness. I mean, like plants can have very evolved consciousness, but it's a group consciousness. Probably bions are similar, I should imagine.
They remind me of archaea. Now, archaea are established scientific facts. They're actually a third domain of life, as opposed, you get bacteria, and then you get eukaryotes. Eukaryotes are all complex life: animals, plants, fungi, and then you get the bacteria as a separate domain. The third domain is archaea, and they're like bacteria, but you know what? They don't have a cell nucleus. They have a DNA in them, but it's not in the nucleus. And they're also they're very, very hardy. You can put them in salt, you can put them in acid, you can heat them up, and it doesn't kill them.
Yeah, I don't think bions are as hardy as that, and I don't know if they've got DNA. I've not heard of anyone checking them for DNA, but as far as I know, they're just plasma and a plasma wall. And I don't know much about. Is it archaea?
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about them. I know the comparative size of viruses, bions, and bacteria roughly, but I don't know how that compares to archaea.
I think archaea are a bit bigger. Archaea are generally about the size of bacteria.
Yeah, it's a different class then. You've got a bion is about 2 to 10 nanometers, which is about a bunch of viruses. Like, some people would say, well, you can't even see them with light microscopes, but that's because they haven't tried. It is possible, and there's an even smaller, like there's like a cancer bion, or which Royal Reich also found.
Ah, yes, Royal Raymond Reich, yeah.
Yeah, Reich called it the BX virus, and Wilhelm Reich, Royal Reich, called it the BX virus, and Wilhelm Reich called it the T bacilli, after the German T for death. So
Tote, yeah, German tote.
Yeah. And they're even smaller than a bion. So like a bion's 2 to 10 nanometers, and a T bacilli or BX virus is a fraction of like a fifth of a nanometer. Or actually, it gets. I'm not sure if it's 200 to 500 nanometers, but you know the strange U-shape symbol. a bion is 2 to 10 UN of the strange U with the little.
That's micro, isn't it? Or
Yeah,
nano? Is that micro or nano?
I
No,
think
because microsieverts, it's got it for that, hasn't it? On the
Oh yeah.
yeah,
So I think
micro.
I think the correct sizing is 2 to 10 micrometers for the bion, and 0.2 to 0.5 micrometers for the T bacilli, which is 2 to 500 nanometers. I think they purposely make it really complicated so that you can't have a comparative thing between all these things, because it's like saying, I say to someone, like, would you, if you're telling someone the way to the corner shop, you wouldn't tell them in centimeters, would you? So that it's unnecessarily complicated, the microbiology sizing.
So, guys, what's the next step in your research, in your research project you're doing now? What are you going to do next?
Me or Nick? For both of us?
Yeah, together or separately?
But do you want to go first, Nick? Yeah.
I'm just carrying on at the moment. I've had a bit of a rest from Question Vessels for a bit to look after my dog, but I'm going out most nights now with a Geiger counter. I'm still trying to capture things in the skies using a Geiger counter, and I'm still going out in the daytime and filming in the ultraviolet. But I'm planning to. Well, I was planning to do a bit of a documentary, but it's just become so hard. I just haven't had the time really, and I'm thinking about writing another book, and also I wouldn't mind doing another paper with Leon. Including some of the entities that we photographed, because Leon's been doing some experiments as well, and he's filmed entities. So we're thinking of doing a paranormal type paper at some point. Yeah,
that should be really exciting. I'm looking forward to that, because some of my Orgonor experiments, it's where you've got like excited orgone, and when I photographed the Orgonor in certain situations with I picked up some weird entities. So I might look into that at some point, or just photographing, doing some photographic work with Orgone and Orgonor, which is excited orgone. And well, my work's focused on Orgone and consciousness. So I want to do some more practical work. I need to find a kind of a good workshop where I can set all my stuff up. So I've had to take my stuff and pack it up for the time being, because I haven't been able to find a suitable place for it. So I'm quite I really want to get going on that.
Oh, cool. Oh, that's been brilliant. Well, at the beginning I said I thought we might need to maybe make this a two-parter or something. But I think we've pretty much covered an awful, certainly the two papers we're referring to, and your collaboration up till now. I unless you feel otherwise, I think we've pretty much covered it pretty well.
Well, I've sent you a few photographs as well, haven't I? They're sort of relevant to the paper and that.
Yeah, that's right. And I just, maybe what we could do is certainly bring you back. Maybe talk about other areas such as the other work you're doing on consciousness and the Orgonor experiments, Leon, and
sure.
And maybe your new book, Nick. We could talk about that.
Yeah, well, I'm collecting. I mean, obviously, Quest for the Invisibles covered the first 5 years, from 2010 up to summer 2015. But obviously, since 2015, I've carried on working, and I'm trying now and over the next couple of years to capture as much new footage as I can. But I'm preparing a book, The Hidden Reality, or Hidden Realities, I should call it. But it's a bit of a slow process, really. But these things don't come that quick. So
yeah,
that's what I'm aiming for, and I'm hoping to get Leon to do some stuff about Orgone in there as well. Do a chapter or so on some of his experiments in Orgone and things.
Yeah, we'll do some work together. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, I mean, you could. I think there's probably going to be more. I think more and more people are going to get interested in this, and they'll probably help you out. I mean, we've already seen like the tide turning with the whole ether thing, because there's we got João Magueixo and physicists like that who are now saying, oh, maybe the speed of light is not fixed and things like that, which is just would have been a scientific heresy a few decades ago. But he's actually been published, and he seems to be quite popular. We've had, maybe the Big Bang wasn't the beginning of the universe, and there's been big conferences on that. Even Stephen Hawking attended them. So I think maybe the tide is turning in terms of scientific orthodoxy. Scientific orthodoxy may be becoming a bit looser, slowly but surely. That's not perfect yet, but I think maybe scientists are allowed to use their imaginations and let their see if they can explore areas they wouldn't normally be able to before. So who knows? I think I think this is certainly there's certainly momentum behind what you two gentlemen are doing, and I'm sure we'll have more to discuss later on. And I appreciate you sending me the photos, Nick, and they're in the papers as well.
Yeah, some of them. There's a picture that I sent of a massive blue bioform. That's not actually from the paper.
Is it not?
That.
Oh, right.
No, I'll send you a couple more actually. I'll go through them, but that one was one of the most recent ones I captured, which was just after the paper.
Yes, here it is. Yes, I see it. It looks like a giant.
Well, so that tree's
blue
about
light.
The tree's about 35 foot. There's two objects on there.
There's a big object and a smaller object. Yeah,
and I've got
to each other.
I think there's a 30-second exposure or 20-second, but I've got one before that where you can see it just fading into reality. I've got several photographs that make up that.
Oh, thanks, Nick. I'd be love to see those. I'd be love to see those. So, the papers you're talking about here, it's called two papers. The positive findings
on Constable's orgonotic bioforms.
Right.
Yeah, and it's on the
website.
Orgone.com. Yeah, it's
which is the journal of psychiatric orgone therapy, or JPOT. But you'll find it easily.
You've got a link on there to the two papers. But paper one really covers just talking about the reason why we've done the paper and proving Demir, and that's wrong in a sense. And then it covers Constable and the GRCU and Florian Georgisa's footage. And the second paper is covering all mine. So it's a two-part.
And most of my work is on the same journal site as well. Most of the work I've done with Orgonor and consciousness and orgone and stuff. I got my own site, but my more formal papers are on there. I mean, that was part of what we wanted to do, is create a formal record of all the bioform work. So it's only a small journal, but it is a formal journal.
Yeah, it's in the format of a proper scientific website. And if listeners want to know more, there'll be links to go to the show notes. There'll be links to the papers and to the homepage. Yeah. And
I must add, actually, I've updated my website as well. I've got a lot more some more pictures and different things on that now, which is www.questfortheinvisibles.co.uk.
I'll put a link to that as well.
Yeah,
and also
you'll find a load of stuff on there.
There'll also be a link to Nick's previous interview, so I do recommend listeners go and check out, just to give us a bit of background to this one. So if you're listening to the recording, it may be worth doing that before you listen to this one. I want to thank you both you gentlemen, Leon Southgate, Nik Hayes. Thank you very much. It's been a really interesting interview. Much appreciated.
Well, thank you, Ben.
Yeah, thanks.
You're very welcome.
Cheers.
You're very welcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed that. I know I did. This is Nik Hayes, Leon Southgate on the HPANWO show on HPANWO Radio.